What's up, duelists? Today I'm bringing you a little bit of coverage courtesy of TCG Pilots on Instagram of the first and second place deck list from YCS Rio, which is pretty hype. It's cool to see other countries pop off. Make sure and check out TCG Pilots and give them a follow. And they said they were going to do some interviews and stuff like that on there. But it's cool to see other countries like have pop-in scenes and stuff like that, especially like like Latin American countries don't get a lot of coverage, don't get a lot of love, and I feel like there's a huge scene there for Yu-Gi-Oh, and it deserves the spotlight. You know what I'm saying? It deserves the ultimate Time Wizard spotlight. Anyway, let's get right into things. The second place list is Victor. He was playing Vayu Turbo, and it looks like a really solid list. It actually looks pretty similar to some of the lists we've been seeing top, but with a little bit less of the chaff, you know what I'm saying? A little bit less of the inconsistent stuff, a little bit less Chaos Sorcerer, a little bit more Royal Oppression, you know what I'm saying? A little bit more of the solid stuff. He actually has the Spirit Reaper tech. Big fan of this card personally. Every time I play with this card in Edison format, I am impressed with it. Just historically, a fantastic card. And it slots pretty nicely into this deck. Some interesting ones in his main deck include the Return. I think this card is just overpowered, broken, and it's one of the reasons to play this deck. So definitely would recommend including this card. I actually was thinking about the most powerful cards in the format, and I think Return is up there with some of the most powerful cards in the format, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if people would agree with me there, but I think it's like arguably the third best card in the format, hands down. But that's a video for another time. The sideboard is where things get kind of interesting. He's actually playing Mask of Restrict. This does conflict with his own Caius and kinda with Sirocco if you need to tribute summon it. But the effect is just so powerful versus frogs. I think it's important to have that sort of hate for a matchup that can give you quite a bit of trouble. That being said, I'm not sure if it's better or worse than Pulling the Rug. Pulling the Rug has other applications, whereas Mask of Restrict really is only for frogs. Triple Dust Tornado, Double Dyna, not playing Cyber Dragon at all. So looking a little bit soft to machines, but maybe it just didn't come up. Maybe he didn't face off against machines. Maybe he got a little lucky and I didn't have to deal with them. Didn't need the system down or whatnot, because I feel like this deck can definitely struggle with machines. And not having a sideboard card for it, it can complicate things for sure. Sideboard Starlight Road, I always like this card. I think it's one of the strongest cards. Never leave home without it. Speaking of which, the first place list is actually playing 2 copies of them. First place, YCS Rio Ultimate Time Wizard is Fong. I believe I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I could be wrong. But he was playing DD Warrior Lady Dragons. This is an invention of mine and Pro Storms. We workshopped this deck, and it looks almost identical to the lists that we have been playing. I think the one thing here that's pretty unique is he's got a 1 main deck copy of Dust Tornado. I actually think that's pretty strong. I've never really tried it myself, but just looking at it, it makes the deck look a little bit more resilient to stuff like Royal Oppression and Raikou targeting your back row, which is always nice. But yeah, the way this deck works, I've explained it a billion times before, is you just rush people down. And it makes sense that this deck did well, just because this guy right here happens to be insane versus the 2 most popular decks right now. So yeah, it definitely makes sense that this was the first place list. Not too surprised to see this deck finally someone picked it up and somebody played it and won a big tournament, like at what we've been saying should be happening. This is definitely one of the best decks in the format because of Future Fusion right here. Another card in my top 3 most powerful cards in the format alongside Return. So if you're not playing a deck with Future Fusion or Return, you're probably playing something a little bit underpowered, in my personal opinion. So that's kind of the vibes that we're getting at. One thing I find really interesting, the main deck looks almost identical. I mean, it's 39 cards out of 40 of like the last profile I took to a YCS where I went like 9-0 or some shit in side events. But the thing that I think is really interesting is the sideboard. He's got no monsters in his sideboard. Also, not really respecting machines. There's just no Cyber Dragons, which I actually think is also a hard matchup for this deck. I think this deck doesn't line up super duper well against machines because you have a great way of beating through Machina Fortress outside of Warrior Lady. Don't get me wrong, Warrior Lady is very good versus Machina Fortress, but outside of Warrior Lady, like if you just don't draw your Warrior Lady or your Warrior Lady gets stopped, it can be a little bit difficult to deal with Machina Fortress. A little bit, not entirely, but a little bit. But no monsters in the sideboard. A lot of spell and trap options, which I think is one of the coolest things about this deck, is that the 19-20 monsters that you do play are just the best monsters, and then you never have to worry about siding in and out monsters outside of like some matchups you side out the White Knight Dragon, or like some matchups you side out a Mass Dragon, like randomly here or there. But like for the most part, you're just keeping all of your monsters in your deck, and it really is just picking and choosing the best spell traps for any matchup, and that's pretty cool. I think that's a cool way to approach sideboarding and a cool way to make it kind of more simple so you don't have to think so much. I feel like a lot of people struggle with sideboarding, and just having a really simple sideboard can go a long way, especially in these longer events. It can save you mental taxation that you otherwise could spend that on the gameplay itself. But yeah, really interesting sideboard. He's got the Lightning Vortex. I love this card in this deck. You really only need the one. You can find it with Gold Sark. So in the matchups like Frogs or any other matchup where they summon like Vanity's Fiend or Dandy tokens or whatever, you can just side in the one. It's almost like you have 3 copies of it because of the Gold Sarks, which is sick. My Body is a Shield. I know ProStorm really likes this card in this deck. I don't love the life point cost, but it's pretty cool. Pretty cool sideboard card. It can help you against Icarus attack, specifically against Blackwings. It can also help you against Lightsworns when they have Judgment Dragon or Celestia, or various ways to try and deal with your Drago, like Lightning Vortex themselves. This can also help against Dragon Turbo when they side in Lightning Vortex and Royal Decree against you. It's a way to protect your Drago to make sure that they can't play the game. Double Nobleman. Double Nobleman for Rykos, clearly. Double Prohibition. This name's Alias. The hero beat matchup can be a little bit tricky, but once you get the Prohibition down, naming Alias, they usually can't play the game. Compulsory, Dust Tornado, nothing to be said. Triple Pulling, pretty standard. Powerful sideboard card in Edison format. Stops Monarch, stops Hero, stops Diva. All that nonsense. And then the sweet, sweet Royal Oppression and Trap Hole sauce. I actually think that these cards are pretty solid. I mean, just sideboard is like 15 solid cards with the exception of maybe My Body is a Shield. But 15 really solid cards, and that's what you get when you have a really solid deck and a really solid game plan and the best monster in the format, DD Warrior Lady. No, I'm just kidding. Shout out to Fong for playing this deck. Clearly, he has been influenced by, someone. Someone perhaps myself, perhaps. No, I'm just kidding. But really happy to see a deck that I put a lot of time into have some success, which is really cool. And shout out to TCG Pilots on Instagram once again. I'm just bringing you a little coverage because it's pretty interesting. This is the first big win for DD Warrior Lady Dragons in a while, so that's pretty hype. I'll see you guys in the next vid. Don't forget to smash like, subscribe, and if you want to try out one of these decks in an upcoming major event, make sure and check out RBET. We got one in Los Angeles coming up pretty quick. Actually, a little over a month away, but yeah, it's coming up quick. So I'll see you guys in the next vid. Peace.